So South by Southwest Gaming Expo is proud to present the next panel that is being presented by King. The topic is building long-lasting game franchises, and here to talk to you about that is John Almbecker and Vince Darley.
All right, thank you. All right. Thank you. It's great to see a fan down here with a good Candy Crush t-shirt there. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Vince Darley. It's great to be back here in the States. I used to live here in most of the 90s, about 9 years, mostly in Santa Fe and in Boston, and it's been really nice here in Austin. It's got a lot of similarities to Santa Fe, so it's really great to be here. At King, I'm kind of responsible for everything to do with the data. And we have a lot of data at King. We get our players play about 1.5 billion level attempts every single day. So there's extraordinary amounts of information feeding through to us. So our data warehouses hold about 2 petabytes in total. And what I love about it is trying to dig into that and understand what is it telling us about the players, how they're behaving, how they're enjoying our games, where they're not enjoying our games perhaps, and the sort of search for the kind of for the truth through those numbers, which will help us then to improve the games. So that's the stuff that I find really fun at King.
All right. So my name is John Almbecker. I'm the lead producer for Candy Crush Soda Saga. And it was released this autumn. And as a producer, my job is essentially I am in charge for the team that makes the game. I am responsible for the business that is the game. And I also take part in the creative process of coming up with new ideas for the game. So on a normal day, you'd see me interviewing for new team members, having strategy discussions, and maybe picking what color that flamingo should have on his hat. Whether there's a red hat or a green hat, what makes more cultural sense, who knows?
Okay, can I get a quick show of hands? Who here's played Candy Crush Saga, Candy Crush Soda Saga? That's almost everyone. Fantastic. Really appreciate it. So the amazing thing about Candy Crush is that it's been pretty much at the top, in the top handful of the mobile top grossing charts ever since January 2013. So over 2 years now. And when we launched the sister title, Candy Crush Soda Saga, that John's been responsible for, that shot immediately to the top of the charts as well, and has been there ever since. And so, what we want to do today is share with you a little bit about, how is it that we've managed to keep these games so popular for so long. And they really are tremendously popular. Today we have a network of around 356 million monthly players of all of our games, and about 149 million every day. And we recently hit the milestone in the last month or so of a total of more than 1 trillion levels played all time. So it's just sort of extraordinary numbers. And so I suppose, for those of you in the audience maybe who are part of the gaming industry, this will be a bit of an insight to you in what's going on. And for those of you who aren't and just enjoy our games, this will be a little, a peek behind the magic curtain of what we do, which will maybe give you a bit more insight into what happens in the games and why it happens.
Right. So just quickly before we go too deep into the world of Candy Crush, I just need to set this up a little bit, so just give you a quick background of what King is and what we do. So King has been around for around 10 years by now, and we've shipped a little over 200 games, I believe. And Candy Crush was definitely not the first game we made. It takes a lot of attempts to get things right. But even if you ignore Candy Crush, and King is to some degree synonymous with Candy Crush, but even if you remove Candy Crush, we still have a whole bunch of other games that rack up around 1.5 billion gameplays every day, and 150 million DAU in those games every day, and also with the current run rate about $1 billion of yearly revenue.
So the sort of first theme today is to start digging into the details, is about bringing science and art together. And that's what we feel that we have to try and do at King. And in the same way that you need binocular vision to get a good three-dimensional, clear view of the world. We view that if you take a purely scientific approach, you get something that's not sufficiently clear, not sufficiently accurate. And if you take a purely kind of creativity and arts-driven approach, again you get something that's not very clear. So we need to bring these two things together, and that's what we try and focus a lot of our time and attention on. And to add a little bit more flavour, from the arts side of things, that's about players' motivation and success and mastery and frustration and challenge and all of those sorts of feelings, and of course fun. And from the scientific perspective, there's sort of 5 main areas that we really, really care about. And those are retention, engagement, conversion, monetization, and virality. And I'm going to dig a little bit later into what those mean in the context of an example of the kind of way that we look at our games. So let's take our first example. So this here is Candy Crush level 65, which is a fairly sort of famous or infamous one. And if you Google Candy Crush level 65, you'll get a few million hits. There's a lot of people talking about it, writing about it. It's people feel really strongly about it. Let me read you a quote from one of our players on the fan page. After 2 months at 65, I finally cleared them all. So excited, I screamed at my hubby to come see. Then it said I failed. I never noticed, besides clearing the board, you needed at least 150,000 points too. Since the game ended, I have no idea how close I was to that total. I cried myself to sleep. It's been another week and I'm still not off level 65. Ugh, so frustrating. So people really do feel strongly about this. Other fans express their emotions a little bit differently. Obviously we care equally strongly about these things and about this particular level. So I'm going to take you through what we did when we began to sort of see that this level really was this sort of super strong challenge point in the game, this really difficult point. And the obvious question to us was, well, should we make it easier? And so the question is, how does one answer that? Let me tell you a few basic facts about this level. First question is, how many attempts does the average player make on this individual level? Turns out the answer to that is around 130. And that's the average player. So there's many players making 300, 400 attempts. It's a lot of dedication to one level, like this lady on the fan page who's been playing it for 2 months straight. But that's only one sort of metric. If we look at the financial side of the picture, this level was responsible for a very large amount of revenue, so that's great. It was responsible for a lot of conversion. Conversion for us is players spending money for the first time ever in our games, which since our games are free to play, most players never spend any money at all. So that's obviously very important. But the other key factor was retention and churn. What percentage of players who started playing this level eventually gave up the game on this level? Turns out the answer to that question is around 50%. So half the players who had made it through to this level eventually stopped playing and gave up. So that was pretty horrifically high. Now, the way that we try and answer these sorts of questions it's typically to set up a carefully constructed experiment in the game. So different players will actually get different experiences. And so some percentage of the players will get a slightly different version of this level. So in this case, obviously, a slightly easier version. And sometimes we'll have several possibilities, sometimes it's just 2. So we run an A/B test is the technical term for it, but it's basically just an experiment. And then we measure all sorts of stuff. And the key thing that we noticed when we ran this experiment, there's obviously, if you make this level easier, the direct revenue and conversion and stuff like that drops. However, you start getting many more players through this level into the future of the game, and Candy Crush today has 870 levels, so there's a lot of future of the game that they can get through to. And the long-term effects of those players getting through into that future is much higher revenue and conversion. And so the balance was clearly in favor of making this level easier. And on top of that, another really important point is that if we can keep the players within our network for longer, that gives us the opportunity to suggest to them, to recommend to them that they play some of our other games. And that's a key factor behind our ability to build this massive network of 356 million players. So, having ran that experiment, it was really clear that we should make it easier, and that's what we did. So this level's been slightly easier ever since. And so the key lesson there is that you've got to ignore the short-term signals. The short-term stuff is just irrelevant. You need to plan these sorts of things for the long term and always take the long-term picture. But that's obviously a little bit harder to do. And so there's a lot of sort of subtlety there, and you need good data scientists to really get the right answers for you. I just want to return to these 5 areas that I mentioned before and consider them in the lights of this particular level experiment. So retention, obviously the key thing there was 50% drop. That was reduced when we made the level easier, so retention's a really important driver. Engagement's another thing that was actually super powerful on this level. When players do eventually get through these sorts of hard levels, they're super excited. And that excitement and sense of mastery over the game is something that really kind of engages them to the future of the games. They stick with it for a long time. Now, obviously, if we make this particular level easier, that's going to be reduced a little bit. But it turns out it's not reduced that much. We didn't make the level super easy. We just reduced its difficulty a little bit. And that was that kept the sense of engagement for most of the players. So that wasn't lost. Very important. Monetization and conversion. Obviously, as what I just sort of mentioned, the short-term thing is those get worse. But in the long run, by making this easier, both of those are actually improved. And the virality side of things, and there's 2 kinds of virality, really. There's the virality within these games. So our players, they share lives with each other. They can even send a couple of extra moves to their friends to help them out when they're stuck. So all of that kind of virality side, that's affected in various ways by these kinds of level changes, but not in any particularly dramatic way. And then you've got, obviously, the external kind of social media around these sorts of levels, that are very hard. And again, that's affected perhaps a little bit, but not in any significant way. So the overall message in all of these 5 areas was pretty much a positive one.
All right, so with the massive success that was Candy Crush, obviously the company started thinking around, okay, so how do we utilize this momentum? How do we leverage this huge audience that Candy Crush has just built for us? And the obvious answer there is, let's give players something more to play, right? So, usually when we make games at King, we have a little process. And the process looks something like this. So, you start off with a tiny team that spins around really fast. They make games really quickly. And all these mini games, they end up in a place that we call Royal Games, which is a gaming portal. It's a place where we have tons of our target audience playing games every day. And from there, we can fairly quickly and fairly easily figure out which of these games stick the best with our audience, which ones do they love, which ones do they play the most. And then those games, in turn, get the next set of treatment. That's usually when the word Saga ends up at the end of the name. And then from there, we pick the winners, and then the game is ended up on Facebook and our main website, king.com. We pick the winners from there, and we give them the full mobile treatment, and then by that time, the team has usually grown to about 2 to 3 what we call scrum teams. Right.
So from a data side of the business, we need to support this process here. And clearly, Candy Crush is a great example of a game that made it all the way through this process. But there are many other games that we develop that get stopped at various points in the process. And so we need to be, carefully analysing the performance in many different ways of these games at the various stages of the development to make sure that these things that we make the right decisions throughout. And those are probably amongst the very most important decisions that we need to make at King. If you devote the resources of 3 scrum teams like John described for too long on a game that is just never going to be good enough, that's a terrible waste of resources when they could be building the next mega hit. So that's super important. And those mostly those are data scientists working in various aspects of this picture up here. So we have about 60 data scientists at King today. And a typical game will have somewhere between 1 and 6 of them attached to it, who work really, really closely with the game team on pretty much every aspect of what's going on there. And alongside those data scientists, we have about 40 people on sort of the tech side of data, operating our data warehouses and so on. For those who are interested, we use things like Hadoop, Exasol, we use Kafka for real-time event processing, where we need really real-time analytics. We use Cassandra as a database to get data back into the games for personalization perspectives. And most of our processing is just a one-off nightly thing. So we operate on a kind of 24-hour cycle with the way that we look at the data. But some of it is real-time alongside that. So there's a big, big mixture. So there's about 40 people managing all aspects of that.
Right. So this is sort of where art meets science. So the game team, in every step of this process, gets to be creative and do the sort of use their mastery of the craft to make a best first guess. And then Vince and his team sort of swoops in and picks out the winners from those tests. Now there's one problem that we had when we were building Soda, and that is we did not want to let the cat out of the bag on what we were doing. So PR and marketing perspective, we did not want to go through this entire process. So the process for us looked a little bit like that. So going straight from having nothing to going live on all platforms, preferably on the same day. We didn't quite manage that, but we managed to ship on all platforms within 2 weeks, and that's sort of to maximize a really big marketing investment that we're doing. So how do you do that? So without this, all of this nice data science backed process, how do you do this? So it starts with a guess. It always starts with a guess. And in our case, the guessing starts around figuring out what the audience wants. And our guess here is that people want to be able to pick up Candy Crush Soda and immediately know what to do, immediately know how to play it from knowing Candy Crush. But also have it be far enough from home base to not be just a one more game. And should also be immediately noticeable that this is higher fidelity and that it's a touch-up of the basic mechanics. So with sort of a vague starting point the team set out, and first thing they did was they built a version sort of based on Candy Crush, and then put that in front of users. So essentially did a lot of user testing. So friends, family, and then also some external user testing. And what came back out of that is it was way too it was just way too close to Candy Crush, essentially. People were expecting a lot more from a follow-up. So then they went completely wild on the other side and just went completely experimental and threw all the mechanics they could in there. And the feedback all of a sudden was that no one understood what the hell it was about. So when the pendulum swung back and forth a few times before you sort of ended up somewhere in the middle. And once you sort of have that in place, what you can do and you can go from there is you build out the entire game based on that, and then you soft launch. And Candy Crush Soda was in soft launch for around 6 months. And soft launch for us means that we let the game go live in a few markets, in a few countries, and then we sort of sit on it and we observe how players behave, and we tweak the game as we go along to make sure that we change the things that we are not happy with. And when we do this, usually what we do is we look at retention first. So, like Vince was talking about, retention is out of the people who come into the game today, how many of them stick around for 2 days, 7 days, 14 days? And this is our proxy for fun. So this is sort of how we measure how fun the game is. So if you install the game today and you're still here in 14 days, you probably think this is a pretty good game. So the more people we can get to stick around, the better. So that's always what we start off by optimizing for. Once you've sort of nailed the gameplay, you've started getting the first retention number sort of right, it's all about levels. And all of our games right now, the ones that are on mobile and that are on Facebook, are mostly based on levels. That is our content, that's what people enjoy. And the whole sense of playing through Candy Crush comes from beating levels. So beating levels and progressing, that is what brings people the joy and the reward. This is a challenge for us, making sure that levels are hard enough so that you get that sense of mastery when you finish them, but also easy enough so that you don't get stuck on a level forever and then you quit the game. And it's a very thin line to walk. And the way we deal with that is, like Vince was talking about before, is A/B testing. So we have multiple versions of levels live. So what we did over those 6 months is we tried to nail the first 30 levels of Soda super, super clearly. We wanted to get the perfect first 30 levels. So at any given point, we'd have 4 to 6 different level flows live in front of our audience. And every 2 weeks, we'd switch in with new ones. New ones, new ones, new ones. And then we'd pick the winner from the previous week, and we'd iterate on that and make it better. And then also make sure we're putting in wild cards and testing out new ideas. So for example, Vince would be getting a level flow that was all about chocolate, and I would be getting one that was all about soda, and trying to figure out what game modes goes where, and what difficulty levels go where. And all in all, I think we tried about 50 or 60 different versions of the level flows before we were done with it. One of the findings out of this, that came in fairly late actually, was that we could take these levels to be quite hard as compared to our other games. So we could turn the difficulty up quite a lot. The reason for this being that we have a lot of players coming in who already know Candy Crush. So they already have sort of the background and know what the game is about.
And so, again, just sort of coming back to this theme of bringing art and science together, the team that's working on all those levels and going through those 50 iterations that John described is a combination, typically, and I think most of the time in this particular case, 2 data scientists, 2 level designers managed by a producer. And so those people are working constantly together to try and iterate on the right things. Obviously, lots and lots of data to look at, but equally lots and lots of trying to understand more conceptually what makes a fun level. It's very easy to design levels that are just not fun at all. And one of the things that came out of that particular work was that we actually ended up making the short-term retention worse. We made second-day retention worse because that led to actually the levels that achieved that led to a better 14-day retention. So very sort of counterintuitive, but we were better off discouraging, in some sense, some players from coming back tomorrow because the levels that they were experiencing were actually better for the bulk of the population over a longer time scale. But let's maybe move beyond levels for a moment. We've focused a lot on that, and we do lots and lots of other stuff in these games. So we experiment. For those of you who've played several of our games, you'll probably have noticed that we experiment with different ways to encourage players to come back and play tomorrow. Not all our players play every single day, so if there can be a little reward or some kind of incentive for a player to come back and play tomorrow, or come back and play 5 days in a row, 6 days in a row, 7 days in a row. So various of our games experiment with all sorts of different ways of achieving that. And we certainly don't have all the perfect answers there, but we're gradually discovering different mechanisms that work well. We also do quite a lot of stuff in our games on the virality side of things. So in all of our games, you can send lives to your friends and that kind of stuff. But in some of them, we've experimented with the ability to send some extra moves to your friends, so you can actually help them out when they're stuck. And that's obviously a great mechanism, both because our players like to kind of help each other and to help their friends out, but also it encourages that kind of friendly competition as well. And we do a lot of experimentation on the financial side of things with the gold bar shop, the products you can buy, all that sort of stuff. But I want to share with you one example that I found super interesting, which was again a Candy Crush example, and really illustrated some of the sort of depth of these games. So these two candies up here, these are some of the power-up candies that you get in Candy Crush if you match 4 or 5 in a row. And it turned out that when we built, because we went through the process that John described earlier, where we built the game on Facebook and our portal first, and then onto mobile, those are actually 2 different code bases. So, and it turned out that the actual subtle mechanics of how the candies fell down and under what circumstances you would get a 3 or 4 in a row just through the process of candies falling down was actually a little bit different on those 2 platforms. And on mobile, you were more likely, just sort of by chance, to get these power-up candies just through things falling down. And that made most levels a little bit easier. Because you get these things, they help you out in the levels, so it makes stuff a little bit easier. And so we thought, well, let's run an experiment where we try to put these same rules into the Facebook version and see what happens there. So we ran, again, a well-designed experiment. Some percentage of players kept the old version of the rules, some percentage got the new version, and we looked very carefully at what happened. And unsurprisingly, we saw that indeed the levels became a bit easier, the players progressed through the game more quickly, but the really interesting thing is what happened to the other metrics. So retention went up. People were enjoying the game more, they stuck with the game for longer, people stayed with the game for just more time. So that was a really nice thing to see. However, as a business, of course, we were very concerned about the financial side of the picture. And so the expectation was if you make the game easier, make the levels easier, people progress faster, well, where's the incentive for them to pay? So you might expect the revenues to go down. In fact, they did the opposite. People were spending more money even though the game was easier. In digging deeper into this, it became clear that the reason for it was just that the game had become more fun. And at the end of the day, many of our players who choose to spend money in these games are doing it just because they're enjoying the game. It's not necessarily because they've hit some big hurdle. Yeah, they'll have hit a little bit of a roadblock, a little bit of a stumbling block, or they'll have run out of lives. And if they're enjoying the game more, they're more inclined to think, oh, okay, I'll spend $1 to get some extra lives, or to get this booster, or to get some extra moves. And so, at the end of the day, it is about making the games fun. And you can make the games, easier, and that actually generates more revenue. So it's a really, really surprising result. Obviously, it's hard to kind of, replicate that in other games. It's, how does one harness that in a bottle and apply it to other games? That's a difficult thing to do. But it's a really important lesson there, that you want to dig beneath the basic sort of KPIs that you're looking at. So I'd like to move to the last topic of today, which is slightly different, and that's just about all the different kinds of players. So as I mentioned, we have 356 million monthly players. The population of the US these days is around 320 million. Now, that means, obviously, that there's tremendous diversity amongst those players. There are players who are, who are super keen gamers, who play dozens of different games, get on top of new games really, really quickly. There are players who are super dedicated and devoted, and they're happy to devote hours and hours a day to playing. And there are people who are obviously completely the opposite end of the spectrum. People who only want to spend a few minutes a day playing, maybe when they're, they've got a break from work, or if they're on the bus or the tube or underground. Great diversity there. And then on top of that, those players also have great diversity in how long they've been playing our games. There are people who've been playing our games for several years, and there are people who only installed their first one of our games last week. And those turn out to be quite different people as well. And of course, each of our games is at a different point in its life cycle. Candy Crush today is a very mature game. Pet Rescue Saga, Farm Hero Saga, a couple of the others that were up there earlier are also pretty mature games now. Candy Crush Soda Saga is a fairly new game, so that the point of the life cycle is very, very different. So this diversity actually causes a whole host of new challenges that are a lot of subtle difficulties there.
Right. So I thought we'd round off with just two sort of subtle examples of where using our data skills found some sort of interesting things. So something we do during the soft launch is that we monitor all the KPIs to make sure they're good enough for the game to go live. We were seeing some fantastic numbers for Soda. In fact, they were a little too fantastic, and we started getting suspicious about how it was just a world of difference between those soft launch numbers and the numbers we usually see when we soft launch games. So a lot of head scratching went down, and we came to a hypothesis. The way we recruited players into the game during soft launch was by putting ads into our other games and making people coming in that way. And our hypothesis came out to be that usually when we soft launch games, people do not have an attachment to the brand. But in this case, most players that we have in our network have already tried Candy Crush, so they probably already have an attachment to the brand. That would mean that those players coming in, they would be extremely biased in the way they play the game. They'd be a lot more engaged. They'd be playing a lot more and be a lot better at the game generally than the average player would be. So, how do you remove bias from a player? Well, you can't. So you need to get new players. So the way we did that was we started doing advertising in external advertising networks, trying to capture the sort of mix that we thought we would see once we did go live. And lo and behold, the numbers we were seeing during soft launch after doing that were actually pretty bang on what we were expecting. Another sort of subtle example of where using data paid off is when we figured out about a month after launch that we had a retention drop. And that's not unusual. That all happens all the time. So the first people who come into your game are going to be the most excited about playing it. They're the ones who have been waiting and sort of just looking for this game to launch. So that's not so crazy. The surprising trend that we saw was that the new players coming in after a month were also a lot worse at the game. They needed a lot more attempts per level to get through. And it generally just took them a much, much longer time to progress through the game. So when you think about it, that's not so... I mean, it's pretty obvious too. Like the first people you get in, they've probably played Candy Crush before. They have a head start when it comes to playing the game. But what do you do about this? How do you act on this? So our game is optimized to be fun at a certain number of attempts. So what this means for us is that we constantly have to go back and make sure that that initial stretch of content is optimized for the new players coming in. And generally that means we make the game easier over time to make sure that we cater to the new cohorts coming in and them having fun.
And a great example of that is actually Candy Crush Level 65, which has been made easier 4 or 5 times over the last few years now for exactly that reason. So I hope this gives a flavour of our own sort of fun, frustrations, challenges and successes in making these games. It's a really exciting journey inside King, and I hope this shows you how we try to make it equally exciting journey for our players across our games. I think we have a few minutes for some questions, so if there are any questions, please do come up to the mics in the middle. Very happy to try and answer. And then also just following on from this, directly on the other side of the hall, we're offering free beer whoever wishes until 6 o'clock, and we'll be happy to answer more questions over there. But I think we've got a little while in here, so let's stick in here for a bit longer.
Hi, thanks. This is a really interesting panel. I had a question about level 65 that you talked about in your example. when you made the changes to that level and to make it easier and easier, did you find that there was any resentment from players who had spent money to get past that level? And if so, was that a significant factor? Was that something you had to mitigate through marketing, or was it just kind of a non-issue?
It's a really good question. So what we always want to make sure we do is when we make levels easier, that we don't do that too often, and we do it slowly through the life cycle of the game. Because it's really important to our players. What they care about most when we talk to them is they want to make sure that the game is for those who want to play competitively against their friends and get ahead of them and all that kind of stuff, they want that to be a fair challenge. And so as long as we keep it at any given moment in time, the game is basically the same for everyone, then the players seem to be very happy with that. And over the years, it's perfectly fine by the players to change the game over time.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, earlier on there was a talk about casual virtual reality. I'm just really curious to know whether you guys are looking into virtual reality and making some of your existing assets VR enabled.
Sorry, could you speak up just a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So previously there was a discussion on the topic of casual virtual reality and mobile-based virtual reality. Just curious to know whether you guys are looking into the format for some of your existing or future titles.
So we've been tinkering around, but we do not have any games live that have any sort of virtual reality features as of right now.
Do you have any personal opinions on whether casual gaming such as Candy Crush Saga would be good for virtual reality?
If you're asking me, I think I've yet to see a really good casual implementation using VR. Let's say that.
Maybe you guys can change that. Thank you.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Hi, I've got a couple of questions on the A/B testing, which is fascinating. One is how far you take that and whether you do A/B testing on things like the sound effects that are personally one of the most powerful things in the game that get you to come back. And secondly, I just wondered whether there was anything that Vince's team had to kill on the science side that was a real shame from the art department, that you'd come up with an idea, you were gutted that the numbers had killed off.
All right, I'll take the first part of it at least. So the super boring part of this is, so we have technical limitations. Usually one of the big ones is our apps have to come in under 50 megs. So A/B testing audio, as fun as it would be and how awesome as it sounds, is not technically feasible as of right now. I think pretty much all our apps are pushing the 50 meg boundaries. There's like 49.7 or something right now. So that would be awesome. If there's anything I've been gutted by your team killing for me,
I'm sure there must be some. I mean, there's certainly, our games are developing really exciting new features, all the time that we then sort of test, and certainly some of those features don't live up to what we're expecting them to do. And they end up getting killed. I'm trying to think of a good example of that.
I have a couple of my favorite game modes that never made it into Soda because of you guys. No.
Thank you.
I have a question on localization. Does localization matter for these games? And maybe what are your top 4 markets? And one last question.
Yep.
Kind of understanding what data do you wish you had from your partners that you don't have today?
All right, so starting off with localization, yes, it does matter, and we try to localize as many of the markets as we can. I think, yeah, short answer is yes, it does matter, and it matters in many ways. So you see that when you localize, not only do you get you bring up the amount of people in that market that would be interested in playing your games because it's localized. But it also brings up the trust in the game and sort of the brand that the game is. If you have a good quality localization, people will be more likely to trust the game and to actually spend money.
I suppose another angle on localization is there's sort of simple ways you localize your games, just changing obviously the language of what's there. There are questions that we discuss as to whether for particular large markets we should go beyond that and actually change the game experience in some more significant way, because that's the kind of experience that players in those markets are expecting. And so that's something that we discuss a lot but haven't yet done anything significant in. I'm trying to think what were the other questions.
Yeah,
there.
two more. Top 4 markets, and then the last one is what data do you wish you had for maybe your partners that you don't have today?
So the data that we wish we had, I suppose my own personal favorite is we don't actually gather data on what the player is doing inside the level attempt. So which candies are you moving, exactly what's going on. We just can't get data that the players started this level. And certain timestamps and stuff like that, and then we get data at the end of it to say what happened, what was the result, did they succeed, did they fail, how many points did they get, any particular achievements in the level, but exactly what happened in between. All we know is it took 2.5 minutes, and I would love to have more of that. But that's we deal with a lot of data today, and that would be a factor of sort of 10 or 100 more, so it would be pretty horrible to contemplate. Top markets, US is the biggest market.
Not on top of my head, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not.
No.
It's there. I mean, amongst the top 10 are UK, Germany, France. I think we're doing okay in China these days, so that might be in there as well. So those are. It's the sort of usual suspects, I would say.
Thank you.
Hi. Got a question about the creative process for Soda. So Soda as the chief differentiator from Candy Crush. Did you think of lots of other candidates for that? And was, when one of you came up with Purple Soda, was it a eureka moment?
Yes, so definitely there are more ideas that didn't make it in and that just were deemed either too weird or people just didn't get it. So something that actually you've started to see it now, for example, if just what something is, soda is essentially just, it's a really good metaphor for reverse gravity, right? So having candies fall upwards, how do you explain that to people? Okay, let's use water, stuff floats up in water, yeah, that works. But we do have the possibility to do like left and right and all kinds of gravity. And we did have a hard time visualizing that in a way that made sense to play. We experimented with different colors, soda, doing different things with respects to gravity, and just, it doesn't make sense. So
was it the gameplay idea came first and then the visualization came afterwards?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I just have a quick question, and just wondered if you started monetizing non-paying players, and if there's any data about retention or time in game because of that.
So, sorry, one more time.
Have you started monetizing non-paying players, showing them ads, and making money, off of non-paying players?
So we're not today. A couple of years ago, we did have adverts in our Facebook games, so we were monetizing the non-paying players then. But actually, we chose to remove them. And the basic reason is, obviously people don't like ads, particularly when those ads are kind of preventing them from playing the next level. And so, that was a revenue stream that we just turned off. And at least so far, we don't want to turn it back on. We feel that there's the sort of the beautiful immersive experience of our games and the sort of level of effort that the teams put into the music, the graphics, just everything. That is such a sort of wonderful experience for the player that we don't want to disrupt that by doing something else across the board. Is that the right sort of, if one was hard-nosed financial person, is that the right decision? Slightly unclear, of course. We can't really know, but certainly the feedback from our players is obviously that they love things without ads.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for one last one.
Okay. Hey guys, you have talked about a lot about data analysis on all your games. I'd like to check with you if you also do like prediction analysis to understand if a specific player is going to churn in the game or another specific player is going to buy soon, this kind of stuff.
So both of the two examples you gave, predicting whether a player is going to churn and predicting whether they're likely to spend money, we do both of those, yes.
Okay. Do you use any specific tool for that, or software, or you do everything internally?
So all internally. That's one of the things that those 60 or so data scientists spend some of their time on. So they tend to use Python and R and then Java when we put things into production. Okay, I think that's
Thank
the
you.
end of questions. We'll be over on the other side grabbing a free beer. If anyone wants to come along, please do. Thank you very much for all the great questions. Really fun discussion.